Welcome to the Tyler's Place podcast. I'm your host, Maynard Edwards. Happy spring, everybody. I really hope it's spring wherever you are. I know there are a lot of parts of the country that are being affected by this very, very nasty storm. Especially our thoughts are with our brothers in Nebraska who just underwent some really difficult weather there. And I know guys in Oklahoma and Alabama and Arkansas, you know, a lot of states are being hit with this nasty weather. And so just wanted to let you guys know we are thinking about you. And guys, if you've got reports back about what's happening there, I would love to hear about it. Send me a message, podcast@scottishrite.org. Tell us what's going on. Give us a heads up about your brothers if you can. In the meantime, let's get rolling with the Tyler's Place podcast for March 2019. We're getting ready and getting into the preparation for the 2019 Biennial Session. And this is going to be a really, really big Biennial Session. A lot of stuff happening. We'll talk about that on subsequent shows. But one of the biggest questions we get asked here at the Supreme Council all the time is, why do we have Biennial Sessions? Why not every year? Why not every 5 years? And the answer is actually quite simple. And joining me to discuss it is Brother Arturo de Hoyos, the Grand Archivist.
Good to be here again and bask in your glory.
Well, sure. Hey, I have some cool news. I'm going to share this with the podcast listeners. I shared it on Facebook. My dad just became a Scottish Rite Mason a couple weeks ago.
Oh, that's awesome, man.
Yeah, I got to give him his 4th, 14th, and help with the 18th degree. He became a Master Mason in the fall, and I got to raise him, which is pretty unique. And then he came through the Scottish Rite, because I can't work for the Scottish Rite, and I'm like, Dad, dude, you gotta help me out here, would you? And he was excited to do it, and it was pretty unique and special thing.
Cool. So your dad is your father and your brother.
He is now my father and my brother. I was doing a little bit of research at the request of some brothers in North Carolina, and it's a question we have discussed on this before as we're all entering the preparations for the Biennial Session. And you and I have discussed it. Why do we have a biennial session? And the basic answer is because we didn't want to have an annual session.
That's basically true. There was a time early in our history when we did that. We tried it. In fact, we really met intermittently whenever was needed at the creation of the Supreme Council, and it was really Pike that started that. After we joined really with the Supreme Council of Louisiana in 1855, we went ahead and started working towards having, regular, exactly. Yeah.
But then, in the early 1860s, and this is what my research kind of tells me, with the Civil War happening and the nation in just an upheaval and travel being difficult, Pike realizes, well, we can't do this every year. It's just not going to work. We can't do this, so why don't we try every 2 years?
Yeah, that's right. And it's worked really well for us since.
Now, another interesting thing that I found out is I was looking through the statutes and some of the transactions from those years, trying to figure out if there's a real reason why, or if he ever comes out and explicitly states that. He never does. But I found it interesting that in there, shortly after the end of the Civil War, 1870, there's a note in the transaction. I guess that would have been made by Mackey. That said, the old rules that entered apprentices must have all of their limbs and be must be in good shape of the old stonemason lodges that traditionally have been carried through them do not apply to us. And to me, that has to be a reaction to the men who were injured in the Civil War, who now are missing a limb, that Pike and the Supreme Council were very aware of the impact that had on the country, and making sure that those men knew that they could still be included. And more than that the brothers who would be in charge of initiating them knew that those men were still eligible to be Masons.
That's absolutely true. In fact, we had, subsequent to World War I and World War II, there were Grand Lodges that came out and made changes that way also. Whenever I was initiated in the Grand Lodge of Texas, way back when, there was a form that was filled out that said, is the candidate fit in all of his members? And if not, please indicate. There was a little picture of a body where you'd have to indicate something like what was where we had some kind of a physical defect or deformity or whatever the concern might have been. But yes, today, of course, we understand that this is symbolic, and there's no reason to carry over something like that. It's so meaningless, really. I'm sure you've seen it also, but I've happily been present to see brothers who were initiated in wheelchairs.
My dad.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. Well, Yeah, just recently then. Mm-hmm. But yeah, absolutely. And there's just as much, pride in seeing a brother made, who can't walk as somebody who does walk. That none of that means anything really. I mean, we're Masons of the mind, Yeah,
and they went further in that same transaction to say, hey, if a brother cannot, for some reason, speak or cannot stand to make the signs or tokens or dugars, as long as he can effectively demonstrate in some way, shape, or form that he has been given the proper information to be made a Mason and receive certain degrees, that's good enough.
Absolutely true. I mean, think about it. I mean, would you say that a person who, goes through college, goes through graduate school, gets a PhD, and sustains some type of injury where they're no longer able to teach is no longer a PhD? Do they lose
Stephen
that?
Hawking.
Yeah, like perfect example. I mean, the guy's mind was there. But I mean, irrespective of whether or not we're complete in all of our parts, makes no difference to what we are as a person.
And that, to me, speaks to the character of Pike and to the character of the men of the early Supreme Council days, because I mean, think about how far ahead of their time that kind of thinking was. I mean, this was an era when, handicapped people were essentially just abandoned. Folks with mental illness were just locked away, and that's the end of it. So to in the 1860s, 1870s, to that era, to be thinking ahead and say, hey, these guys still have value. These guys still can be a part of this brotherhood. I mean, that's really far ahead of its time in thinking.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, these guys really were forward thinking, and you can see that in all sorts of things. I mean, that's a very demonstrable thing because it's what we visually see. But if you look at how egalitarian they were, and also in the ritual, I mean, the lessons that we learn in the ritual talk to the value of the individual, that it's, like we say in the craft degree, it's the internal and not the external qualifications that recommend a man to be made a Mason.
I just thought it was a fascinating thing, the awareness that those guys had of, because you don't expect that from that era. You expect I guess a certain level of ignorance, but these men did not possess that ignorance. They were really forward thinkers and making sure that everybody was included. And I found that to be really, really kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Really inspiring.
So there's the answer. Why don't we have biennial sessions? Because we didn't want to have annual ones, and it's no more complicated than that. It's really
yeah. There's no symbolism behind that other than let me sleep in this year.
Why do we have 33 degrees? Because we didn't want 25 and we didn't want 34. That's kind of where it is. It's really that simple. So what is the old saying? Necessity is the motherhood of invention.
That's right. Let's not forget Occam's razor also.
Yep.
All things being equal, the simplest explanation tends to be the correct one.
And Brother Arturo de Hoyos will return a little bit later in the show for Tyler's Trivia. In the meantime, you are listening to the Tyler's Place podcast. I'm your host, Maynard Edwards, 32nd degree KCCH. Podcast at scottishrite.org, of course, is the email address. About a month ago, I had the opportunity to go up and visit the headquarters for the Northern Masonic jurisdiction. Great hospitality, great brotherhood and fellowship up there. Got to talk a little bit about what's going on with them, shared about a little bit what's going on in the Southern jurisdiction. Fantastic meeting. This past week at my home valley, had the pleasure of having Brother Rick Swaim come, 33rd degree, and he is from the Orient of Delaware, which is in the Northern Masonic jurisdiction, and he is what's known as the active for that Orient. And he really explained that there are some definitive differences, obviously, between our degrees and their names and their presentation and so on and so forth, but also some administrative things that are slightly different. And so I asked Brother Rick to explain a little bit about what is his role as the active in the Orient of Delaware.
First of all, Delaware is a really small state, so we have two valleys, but only one that has all 4 degrees, the Valley of Wilmington. And so, or I should say bodies, not degrees. Obviously, we all have the same number of degrees. So we have the Lodge of Perfection, Council of Princes of Jerusalem, which I notice up here, you guys sort of combine with your 18th. And then we do have the Chapter of Rosecroix, which does the 17th, 18th, and then the Consistory, which does the 19th through the 32nd. And so we also have a lower valley. So in the Northern Masonic jurisdiction, typically you have a deputy for the state. So, for example, we have illustrious brother Herbert J. Atkinson. He is the deputy for the state of Delaware. He is technically also an active member because we're referred to as an active member of the Supreme Council for the Northern Masonic jurisdiction. when you get your 33rd degree in the Northern Mississippi, you're called an honorary member of the Supreme Council. But when you're an active member, then you go to their meetings, you vote, all that same sort of stuff. So in larger states like Pennsylvania, you will have an active that will probably be responsible for various valleys, and then the deputy that oversees the state. Where in Delaware, since we're so small, we have the Lower Valley and Valley of Wilmington, and so we have one active member who sort of is an assistant to the deputy. Okay.
Gotcha.
And so we do have a deputy's rep, though, in the Lower Valley, but he's not an active member of the Supreme Council.
Understood. So there's just some slight differences, I guess, in administration, so to speak.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's pretty much an administrative role. And then the assumption is, because actually it's one of the first things they tell you when you come in, is start looking for your predecessor. So, matter of fact, Herbie told me the other day we were having lunch. We try to meet once a month, go over what's coming up, what's happening.
Sure.
What does he want me to do? What do I do? What are some thoughts that I have? I just came in October, so I'm fairly new. Still sort of trying to find my way.
Now, today we run into each other. We ran into each other last month. We were up at the Northern Masonic Jurisdiction at headquarters there in Lexington for some meetings and things. We got to share some thoughts and ideas there. But today you're actually here in the Susquehanna Valley, which is one of the newer valleys. And since I'm a member, I like to think of it as the premier valley. I'm kidding, guys. Just don't send me emails. But this is my home valley. And, you got to see some of our degree work. We don't have a large temple. We are in a lodge room, and we tend to move around from lodge to lodge. So tell me your thoughts after you saw 4, 14, and 18 today.
Correct. First of all, as I mentioned, the division of the bodies is a little different. But what I liked about it was, I think the message, the education from the actual degree is more didactic. It's right there. It's really explained to you, where we do a lot more plays and performances, or at least compared to what I saw today. And so the message is there through the acting, but it's not as clear. We do typically do a prologue, but we at the end don't typically say much in terms of what you just saw, and leave it up to the people to sort of take it away. Now, we've talked about trying to do more of that, and so, but here today, there's no question that the message of the degree was right there in front of you and very clear what it was all about. It was really good.
Now, you guys confer degrees in a couple of different ways. You've got some videos in some places in smaller valleys that don't have the ability to do the full thing, so that they can still see all the degrees, whereas we do, we have someone read basically a synopsis. We communicate it to people, so some differences there. But you also do large productions on stages in the same way that a lot of our larger valleys do. And do you also do some in the lodge rooms and things like you saw here today?
The Lower Valley in our state, for example, because we used to have our own building, and that was in Lee Boulevard in Wilmington. And as with a lot of large cathedral-type buildings, at some point you just can't keep them up, too expensive. And so we ended up selling it. And now we use the fourth floor, what's called the Grand Opera House, which is actually where the Grand Lodge of Delaware is also. They're on the third floor. We're on the fourth floor. Converted it over, and it's just perfect for what we need for productions. But down south, basically, there's nothing like that available, so they use lodge rooms also. I have not been down to see one of their degrees yet. That will be something I need to now do. I think I have one on my calendar for another week or two going forward. And so it'll be interesting to see how they did theirs compared to what you're doing here.
So this is the first time you've seen a degree put on, a Scottish Rite degree in a lodge room setting?
Exactly. And like I said, it came off real well. The other thing is we do degrees. We're required to do certain degrees, and there has to be something we typically hit every body. Obviously, Lodge of Perfection like yours is the 4th through the 14th. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of various possibilities there. And we typically will do the 4th and then one of the other ones. The Council Prince of Jerusalem is only 2 degrees. And you got the 15th and the 16th. And same with the Rose Croix. You got the 17th and the 18th. So they're, one here, one there. And then when you get in the consistory, you have the 19th through the 32nd. Mm-hmm. And so they have a pass book, and what they're trying to do is they get people to come to all the different degrees. And so within the Valley, you're trying to say, okay, last year we did this one, what can we do here? So we do a set of reunions in the fall and a set of reunions in the spring. And so we just finished the 18th last week up at ours, and now we will meet again for one more final reunion where we'll do 2 or 3, I don't know if they decided how many, of that consistory degrees. And so it shakes out a little different.
Yeah, it sure does. But in terms of watching a degree in the lodge room, I like this because I think it's a little more in your face. It's a little more, you can, I love the big theater setting because, the pomp and the circumstance and the costuming and the sound and the lights and all that. And it can certainly make an impression. But, when you just take it down to its simplest roots, it's almost like having a band that just plays acoustic guitar. They're a big rock band. They suddenly go down to that unplugged type thing. It delivers the message in a little more intimate way. And it's a lot more personal, I think. But I like both. But, if I had to pick a favorite, I'd say I like the lodge room a little better than the other. So after having seen this, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, again, I think the beauty is, and this is why I like where we live. I technically live in Pennsylvania. I'm in the Valley of Wilmington in the state of Delaware. I'm only 20 minutes away from New Jersey. It only took me 50 minutes to get down here. Now, I can be in Maryland quicker,
sure,
but in terms of coming down here to this valley, if you think about that sort of conglomeration of possibilities to really take in, because at the end of the day, it's all about Freemasonry, right? And I think, this notion of trying to really, what does each arm, if you will, body, a pendant body, whatever, have to bring back to the message that we all took when we first kneeled at the altar of Blue Lodge Masonry. It continues to just build and grow, and it's just another way of looking at the message, and I think that's powerful.
And to me, both Scottish Rite, Northern and Southern, it's about taking some of those basic lessons you learn in the Blue Lodge and then really putting them to work in a deeper level so that you can improve yourself as a husband, as a father, as a friend, as a brother, as a professional even, because it's all about asking these questions of yourself and finding out where you fit in and finding out your relationship with God, your relationship with your community, your relationship with the political world, with the ethical and moral world. And so it's like a structure to ask those questions. And that's what I like about it.
Well, absolutely. And I was thinking today, and it was actually when you were doing your part in the 1 degree, I said, boy, is that powerful. And the power was when you asked whether or not anyone took the name of the Lord in vain. And I expected everyone to go, no. And it's almost like when I ask my students sometimes something that like, have you ever told a lie? No. Well, thank you. You just lied. Yeah. Because I said, you were 2 at one age. I know you were 2 at some point in your life, and you may not remember the lie. I said, but let's be honest. And actually 2 of the brethren said, and I thought that was pretty cool. But it didn't end there. It's like there was a message and a lesson in it. And I went, that's the power of what we're talking about. And how many people come to meetings or come to see degrees here or whatever, and they just are sort of like watching a movie as opposed to thinking about what's actually going on. What's the message? And that's, again, we're probably here. It's a little more powerful than just watching a play. But, again, each has its merits, way of getting to you, and I think we need to try to share those things a little bit more.
Indeed. That's Brother Rick Swaim, 33rd degree. He's the active for the Orient of Delaware in the Northern Masonic jurisdiction, talking with us a little bit about his thoughts on viewing some of our degrees in a lodge room setting, and hopefully I'll be able to get and visit his lodge very soon and see how they do things and report back to you guys. Speaking of Masonic education, we switch gears now and we'll talk to Brother Mark Oldknow, 33rd degree, from the Valley of Santa Fe. He's our educational correspondent, and we've been talking a lot about virtues. We continue that discussion and focus in a little bit on virtues presented in the 9th and 10th degree. So let's pick up our chat with virtues. Brother Mark?
So we talked about what virtue is. We talked about the historical taxonomy or frameworks, the lists of St. Ambrose of the 7 cardinal sins and the 7 great sins and the 7 cardinal virtues and the theological virtues. So we've just kind of covered and laid out the land about what we think about virtue, what it means. What I'd like to do is take that piece and place it into a Scottish Rite context. And here's the rub. I'm going to kind of give away the punchline at the beginning, so it helps us to kind of guide our thinking and our discussion here, is that really, if you look at the order of the way the virtues are presented in the 9th and 10th degree, what we really see is a Kabbalistic presentation of the virtues. They're really corresponded to the tree of life. And so Pike is offering us, and the Scottish Rite is offering us, a tool that's really much richer than just a list of virtues. But hey, I can't just say that. I have to give a little bit of backup for it. So let's talk about this. In the 9th and 10th degree, this is a very old degree sequence. It tells a variation of the story of the three villains in the Blue Lodge. And this is indeed a very old set of tales. I've seen a cover of a frontispiece from circa 1700 that actually show images from this story, from the way this tale is told about the three villains. So it's been extant for a very long time. Now, at the end of the degree, in the way that it's currently constituted, Solomon says, and I'm going to quote, "Reflect upon the light. May the virtues represented here admonish each of us to dispel the darkness of ignorance, fanaticism, and ambition, and inspire us all to perform whatever duties Masonry may require." Now, I'd like to pause and again highlight two things he's saying here. Reflect upon the light. May the virtues represented here, so again, represented by the light, the virtues represented by the light, admonish us to dispel the darkness of ignorance, fanaticism, and ambition. So three kind of great sins or three great problems. Then what he does is he goes on to list 9 virtues, and as he says each one, a candle alongside the altar is lit, referring to the light or emphasizing reflect upon the light, each virtue that's being given. And then again, he's saying that the force of these is to dispel the darkness, to light up and void, to dispel ignorance, fanaticism, and ambition. Let's look at the 9 virtues in order and talk about them in groups of 3. The first virtue that he cites, and the first candle that is lit, impartiality. Impartiality focuses us on the good of humanity as a whole, beginning to turn ourselves away from just our own egoic needs and beginning to consider ourselves as part of something greater. Now, the next virtue that is mentioned in the list is courtesy. Courtesy is not only how you allow something to happen, holding a door open for somebody, but it's the courtesy of being able to say thank you and recognize when the door is being held open for you. The third virtue that is listed is devotedness. Devotedness, of course, is faith. Now, the 3 of these, impartiality, courtesy, and devotedness, come together as a triad to dispel ignorance. The next set of virtues. Speak a little bit quickly. Firmness, that we're not easily diverted from that which we are devoted to. The next virtue that's listed in the list and the next candle that's lit is frankness or honesty. Honesty conquers error or untruth. Last but not least within this triad is generosity. Giving of yourself, again, a profound focus on the other. The 3 of these, firmness, frankness, and generosity, come together as a triad to dispel fanaticism. Last but not least, the third triad, we light the 7th candle, self-denial. This notion that of self-denial as a virtue, the real magic in that, the real power in that, is that you begin to discover that you're far greater than the mere self that you think you are, that really you partake of everything in the universe that God has created. And your form is always greater, is always potentially holding more than than the mere limitation of your idea or your thoughts at the moment. You're always greater than what you think you are. The 8th virtue is heroism. It's action on behalf of other. coming out of self. And last but not least, the final candle that's lit in the 9th and 10th degree corresponds to the virtue of loyalty. Loyalty is a positive assertion of self-denial, represents a different sense, a final sense of identity, an identity that is different, that is now tied to something that is greater, that is higher, that is better than what it was. We're offered in the 4th degree the tree of life as a tool for understanding and organizing our philosophical principles, relating them to each other, but also to ourselves. And here, in the 9th and 10th degree, without any fanfare, that Kabbalistic tree, that tool from the 4th degree, has been applied in a very quiet way. It's never called out. But you can see a direct correspondence between this list of the 9 virtues and those spheres that are within the Kabbalistic tree. This is one instance of a hidden esotericism, of hidden tools, of greater value to be had within our degree work if we look and we keep peeling stuff away. So, stick with your master craftsman, keep listening to this podcast, and we'll keep offering you some more tools.
Brother Mark Oldknow, 33rd degree, our educational correspondent here on the Tyler's Place podcast. And if you got a question, something you want Brother Mark to discuss in terms of Masonic education or about the Scottish Rite degrees, go ahead and send us an email, podcast@scottishrite.org. This is the Tyler's Place podcast. I'm your host, Maynard Edwards, 32nd degree, KCCH. Art de Hoyos, the Grand Archivist, has returned, and we're going to get into Tyler's Trivia. We actually have a dual answer here, which is pretty cool, because you asked about the oldest text that we have in the Supreme Council Library, and we're going to let it go with a manuscript and a printed text.
That's right. Yeah, we're not splitting hairs. We're going to be kind, and so if there were 2 possibilities, and the answer is that the oldest printed text that we have is a book of sermons by Albertus Magnus that was printed in 1479. But the oldest manuscript text that we have is a vocabulary of things, or vocabularium rerum, I think is what it was, from 1495. And that's kind of an interesting text. It's a collection of phrases that were in common use, Latin phrases that should have been known by people at the time, so that for like we continue to say etc., et al., things like this, but they were much more expansive than that. So you have your choice there, whether you choose manuscript or printed text. They're both from the 1400s, just shy of 1500.
Well, we've got some answers on both, and we're going to get those brothers hooked up. But I know for a fact we got Brother John Sane from down Tennessee way. We're going to hook him up with a great autographed text from Brother. It won't be one of those texts we mentioned. Those are kind of important.
No. Those cost a little bit more than my books do.
Yeah. So, but in the meantime, let us move on to the question for March 2019.
What is the Masonic connection between every president from Andrew Jackson to Andrew Johnson?
What is the Masonic connection from Andrew Jackson to Andrew Johnson?
The Masonic connection to every president between Andrew Jackson to Andrew Johnson, from Andrew Jackson to Andrew Johnson. So that's, what's that, 1833 or something like that, up to about 1860, I guess?
Yep.
Don't.
That's it.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we will, and if you know the answer, go ahead and jot it down. Send me an email, podcast@scottishrite.org. And also you can enter on SR Chirp or the Scottish Rite Day app if you have that. Check those out. They're free in your app store, and get them to us. And we record these just before we send the podcast out. So everybody's got an equal chance. In the meantime, that is going to wrap up the Tyler's Place podcast for March 2019. Hope you guys are having a great spring. Hey, if you've got reunions going on, degree work happening, we'd love to hear about it. podcast@scottishrite.org. And don't forget, if you're listening to this podcast for the first time, you've got an interest in Freemasonry, you got questions, comments about the show, you want to become a Freemason, send us an email, podcast@scottishrite.org. We'd love to hear from you. I'm Maynard Edwards. I'll catch you next time right here on the Tyler's Place